Thank you, Martha. And thank you all for coming out in full force for Kara Walker tonight. Talking to a friend the other day about Kara and her work, we were hard-pressed to come up with artists working today, any other artists working today, who even come close to her in terms of making work that so consistently and effectively gets at the complexities of our contemporary human nature, our simultaneous drives towards pleasure and pain, love and hate, brutality and compassion. And her art does so with such a precision and economy of means that appears totally authoritative, and yet with such a juxtaposition, with every juxtaposition of images, it reveals the complete ambivalence with which we actually relate to the world. Kara Walker's work poses the toughest questions and ensures that we never get too comfortable with the past. And the new work that we're going to see upstairs tonight confronts histories that are poignantly and frighteningly much closer to our own time than the antebellum setting in which her work often takes place. The primary issue at stake here, namely the race war as defined by white supremacist rhetoric, while extreme, is all too real and current. So here's a glimpse of the installation, which we will discuss more in depth a little later. But first, maybe, Kara, you can provide some background and context for the new work by walking us through some images of earlier works.
Hi. Sure. I often include this image when I give a talk because this is something that came to me when I was a young art student in my early 20s, and it kind of awakened me to several different ways of thinking about images and image making and subjectivity and the role of the author or the artist, or in this case, the photographer, and the kind of currency around certain types of depictions, particularly of Black women, the other, depictions of the other. When I received this image, it gave me some kind of indication of a stereotype that I might be viewed as. And at the same time, I began to wonder about the agency of the subject, the sitter in this photograph, this young girl. I wanted, on the one hand, to view her not as a victim of a cruel joke, which is obviously what the card is meant to sort of traffic in, but as somehow still a human being aware of her sort of position in relationship to the camera and in relationship to, the author that would make her be something. And I also was interested in the ventriloquism of the image, that somehow these words not only are put in her mouth, some class A, but that they must be put in her mouth. That there's some kind of need that the author, presumably white, presumably patriarchal structure, has for this other body to become a container for some kind of desire. So those kinds of thoughts started to sort of percolate in me and start to undo my idea about painting. I was a painting student, so.
So it seems to kind of have started something.
It started
for
something,
you.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm jumping on your jumping. Like I'm trying to get this over with. There's too many people here. For you. Like okay. I
thought that would be a good entrance to talking about Negress notes. So,
yeah. No, that's true. This series of drawings for many years, I sort of gave them the subheading Negress notes, and probably a lot of what I've been doing was sort of incubated in graduate school and then moved very quickly away from there. But when I was trying to process these ideas of representation and subjectivity and Blackness and also sort of social expectations for Black woman's creativity, I started doing a lot of drawing and a lot of writing, and it was a way of processing images, a lot of received information from, like stereotypical, depictions of black people from 19th and 18th century broadsides, basically anything. I sort of opened up the world of images. Deciding that I could view everything as somehow relating to my body historically, and my own sort of quirky misunderstandings of that body.
And the postcard that you showed was one of many kinds of images that you were
Right.
collecting and looking at.
I was collecting, some were given to me, some I just happened upon, and some very grotesque, some much more kind of vague and, just sort of, there were a lot of conversations, obviously, in the late 80s, early 90s around identity and representation, and so it was easy to sort of use those types of images as a jumping off point for reading, culture, trying to read, the image of African Americans or of the black in Western culture. So.
And you were doing painting.
I was making large, oil paintings as a student, and at the time, there was a lot of large oil painting going on, and I thought that was, the medium that was the real art. And I basically started drawing and doing watercolors because they were sort of antithetical to fine art. They were sort of homey and sort of relegated to a second-class status, but also very expedient and intimate. And it was a way for me to process types of images, not just images that I was seeing, but also things that I didn't know I knew about, things that were sort of lurking in my own, in my own mind, in my own subconscious, that sort of came forward with a great deal of force, actually.
And concurrently, or sort of on the heels of that process of looking at all of those images and making so many images, and the Negress notes writing and making the watercolors, and then comes this.
Right. This was the first large-scale piece. I had started doing cutouts, or sort of cutting things out and making these kind of silhouette pieces. There were a lot of reasons, actually, so I can condense it to, one was just to answer, my problems with painting. And I started to recognize my persona, or at least myself, as I was wrapped up in ideas about painting, that I started to think of myself as this kind of character who was trying to sidle up next to white power, trying to sidle up next to sort of this patriarchal form, but never fully allowed entrance. And so the silhouettes and these sort of domestic, second-class citizens, pursuits became a way of sort of addressing that, that sort of schism of sort of wanting to, of sort of critiquing this institution of, Western painting, but also sort of playing up this idea of like trying to sidle up next to power. So, the large pieces like this, which was 50 feet long, and it's like the first time I ever worked that large, it was a way to kind of coalesce two competing interests. One was, the small-scale domestic production, and also this kind of grand history painting, this idea that, that you could sort of captivate an audience with a story that's, either based on history or based on some kind of mythology that's, immersive and, pre-cinematic, but, I like those kinds of artworks because they fall, again, outside of the narrow constraints of fine art. They become something so bombastic and so kind of hubristic that they also are a little bit second class, a little bit, out of step with contemporary thinking.
You managed here to turn drawing, to make drawing into an epic scale, into a scale of history painting, even beyond history painting. You actually, turn drawing into,
I tried
into a
to
space, into a room.
Right,
a
right.
size
Like
thing.
the cyclorama is the other sort of reference, which is, the history painting gone rogue, so like history paintings that, again, like that's the immersive kind of quality and the kind of second-class art experience that I find fascinating.
So this was first shown, this is an installation that was part of your recent mid-career retrospective at the Walker, but it was first shown in 1994.
Right.
Drawing Center.
Drawing Center in a group show that, and I was months out of grad school, so it was kind of like a finishing piece, like a finishing school in a way, that show.
And the title?
The title, Gone, an Historical Romance of a Civil War as it occurred between the dusky thighs of one young Negress and her heart. Touching off a whole stream of like longer and longer winded titles, or sort of, because I wanted the title to, like the whole experience again should be sort of immersive and sort of should, force all of us, I guess, myself and the audience, into this peculiar, idiosyncratic space that's sort of quasi-historical and quasi-truthful.
Right. I think it's all right there in that title, and it starts right from the very beginning, but this, it's a Civil War. As Americans, we always think of the Civil War. It's all we can think of.
Right.
It's a Civil War, and it's, the dusky thighs of one young Negress and her heart.
Yeah.
It's an internal struggle.
Yeah, it's completely internal.
Yeah.
And playing off, I think I had this fascination. I spent some of my childhood, moved to Atlanta when I was 13 from California, and without knowing that I was processing a lot of information, by the time I was in my early 20s, I started to recognize just the ways that people use the kind of Southern mythology to, I don't know, not just justify themselves, but sort of justify sort of crazy, outlandish statements that, are again quasi-historical, but entirely informed by one's own sort of subjectivity and personality and, quirks. And so the idea of just asserting myself as this kind of like amateur historian who, will tell it like it is, even though what she's saying is kind of like, 5 parts fact, 95 parts. I'm not so sure that's, what they meant by that. That's that idea, or I guess part of the role of the, this narrator, this unreliable narrator, I think, that I am, or that makes this work. Yeah.
Well, it's unreliable if you're looking for one real truth.
Well, if you're looking for one real truth, but if your truth is kind of infused with Gone with the Wind and Uncle Tom's Cabin and all these pop cultural references, and if you're kind of thinking about the ways that, a novel like Uncle Tom's Cabin could, be attributed to being this, the instigator of the Civil War, for grabbing the hearts and minds of Americans and making them, reject slavery, and then the term Uncle Tom could then move its way through culture as this, derogatory term that could then be accidentally used by a young girl like myself in elementary school to compliment her favorite assistant principal because out of sheer cluelessness, right? And this is one of those things that, kind of haunts me to this day, but I tell you this out of
it's just amongst us, it's just close friends
pure
here.
confessional now. But that's the person who's making this work, is the one who has completely, who's actually been who's not been inculcated into the rules and mores of our conversation about race or how one should behave or not behave. And it's not for, any malice. It's just, it's actually kind of this Candide-like, optimism that we had, moved beyond, into a space where I'm very free. And then finding something quite opposite.
You allow
Sorry, I'm
that.
talking to my
You
beard.
allow-
I'm swallowing
No,
all my...
you allow that freedom. So you mentioned Uncle Tom's Cabin, so I just
right.
clicked to this.
Right, this
next
was
slide.
another early piece of mine that was also kind of an extrapolation from Uncle Tom's Cabin into my own space again. It's the end of Uncle Tom and the grand allegorical tableau of Ava in heaven. The title, which is not entirely my own, was drawn from a broadside advertising a 19th century production of Uncle Tom's Cabin. You know, it was super popular to have stage productions of a play of the book, musical, and the sort of ending tableau would be, I guess, I don't know what it contained, but I was thinking about, Harriet Beecher Stowe and maybe her relationship to her characters, and perhaps she identified somewhat with little Ava. Perhaps there was this kind of martyr instinct in her that is mimicked by Ava in the book, cutting off her locks of hair on her deathbed, and why does this little innocent child have to be this sort of martyr? Would she have to sort of be, like beautifully dying, on her deathbed? And what does that have to do with the sloppy mess of slavery?
Indeed. Speaking of.
Speaking of sloppy messes.
and slavery, and the title that you
Oh, maybe.
not remember, but so that last piece was 1995, and this was from 1997, a commission by the Walker Art Center.
Right.
And the first one that was entirely in the round,
Right,
is that right?
right. That was,
Okay.
I was dreaming of making my sort of cyclorama piece, and they built a round room for me, which I filled up, and I filled up the world with a title. I'll read it this time, because I always skip over it every time I give a presentation. It's, again, less a title and more an announcement. Slavery, slavery, presenting a grand and lifelike panoramic journey into picturesque Southern slavery, or life at Old Virginny's Hole, sketches from plantation life. See the peculiar institution as never before, all cut from black paper by the able hand of Cara Elizabeth Walker, an emancipated Negress and leader in her cause.
So all cut from black paper.
Yeah.
Let's talk about silhouette.
The silhouette.
Yeah. I know we're going to react against silhouette in a few
Yeah, we will
slides
react
from now,
against silhouette.
so
Yes.
let's talk about it.
So cutting from black paper. Well, I think as I was doing my sort of investigations into the types of art that I like, I will say that, I hate being super autobiographical, but I guess that's part of it.
You're
so
allowed.
I know. It's the impulse to make paintings, came early. My father's a painter, and I sort of had a vague sense of what was happening in modern art, modern painting, maybe sort of figurative painting and stuff like that. And Wayne Thiebaud was kind of like a presence somehow in my understanding of painting, and Robert Colescott and some other people like that. But I discovered as a young adult that I really liked old genre paintings and those big history paintings. It was a trip to the National Gallery that did it for me. And I sort of liked the herky-jerky, stilted quality of, political cartoons from the 19th century, and this sort of goofball sincerity of, trying to coalesce all this information into one still image, one surface, all have everything occurring at the same time. And I, was running across a lot of silhouette imagery, representations, and I started using black paper, too many reasons, to get back at myself for this thing about painting, this love-hate sidling up with power relationship, but also to just sort of remove myself from a lot of conversations, or that I was either not allowed to be in, or that I was supposed to be in, supposed to be having in my work. And let's see, what else can I say about the cutout? There's a lot to say about the cutout, but I can't remember it. Maybe you can ask me something.
Well, caricature, the simplicity of it, what it kind of allows.
Right, actually, that's true. There's
the white, first of all, the black paper on white wall
Right.
initially. And
Right, yeah, doing the cutouts was also a way of just sort of, like, obviously rendering everything black. Everything becomes like this one surface. It was a way to kind of like infuse everything with a kind of blackness, which I wanted the drawings to also be infused with a kind of like, with my own body. This was a way of kind of doing that in this kind of abstracted, jokey way about black. But the other thing about the itinerant silhouette artists of our past, all those forgotten heroes, is their skill was always or often predicated on their quickness, their ability to kind of render a likeness or arrive at a truth in a minute or less. And I sort of love the idea of just being able to sort of like pick up and go and render a truth of a space in under a week or something like that.
with your X-Acto knife.
With my X-Acto knife, and there's something very sort of liberating about it.
It starts to get
Things start to get murky quickly.
Yeah, right?
Well, because I also got really popular really quickly, and part of what I want to do, I guess, is have a life in art and not just be swallowed up. But I started to react against the easy, quick read, like people saw black silhouettes on a white wall, and it's a Kara Walker silhouette piece or something like that. And so I began sort of fishing around. I didn't feel like I never felt like I was done with the silhouette and the cutting, because there's some other things attached to working on paper that I haven't even dealt with yet or talked about, but I'm not done with it. So was cutting things up on black wall and a gray wall, black and white figures here and there, trying to slow down the read, So this is actually a much darker image, so brightened here just so you could see it, but it's like black paper on a black wall, so.
So it takes longer.
It takes a little bit longer. Yeah. It just increases the pause like a little like that. So.
The last couple of images that we looked at, even their earlier works, but they were included in your survey exhibition.
Right.
So talk about what that's like to have a survey exhibition.
Survey at 37?
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to call it a survey.
I think it's better to call it a survey than a mid-career, because it does kind of like
what does that
end your life immediately.
But a retrospection too, it sort of seems like it's all backwards from here. So
well, even
a lot
when
more
we were
forwards.
working on the show, with Philippe Verne from the Walker Art Center, we weren't calling it a retrospective. We were sort of thinking it was either an introspective or a survey or something like that. But and it was an interesting, I think I was always kind of interested in that, again, like that total immersive environment, and trying to sort of museumify myself or museumify my quirky worldview or something. But having that show did kind of, it was exhausting. There were 5 venues. It was about a year and a half of going and putting up those same works, and we mixed it up here and there for a couple of the shows and added some new pieces. But it did mean that, by the time that show was over, I was sort of, well, now what, And I think that happens to many artists who wind up in that situation where if they have a survey show or a mid-career retrospective, it's like, does that mean it's all said and done? Like, now everybody understands what I'm doing better than I do, and
they've all read the catalog.
And they understand my methodology. So it does make it that much harder to sort of like step into the studio and do what you want to do, whether it feels, because it might feel like a repetition, or it might feel like a stretch, right? Like, and of course you always have to stretch a little bit as an artist.
And you keep doing that. So a little before the retrospective, though, you had this project, and you said that you used the word museumify.
Museumify,
so here we are at the Met.
Yeah, I'm museumifying, being museumified, I guess. I was invited by Gary Tintereau at the Metropolitan Museum of Art to use this smaller room off of the modern section and I sort of resisted this idea for a while because I guess what was offered was, here's this small room and you can do a show of your work. And I thought, well, it felt like a little cheap. Like, oh, I'm just gonna, like, it's the Met, but it's, I don't want to just show off my stuff at the Met like that means, it had to mean something more than just me at the Met. And what wound up happening is I dilly-dallied for a really long time and trying to find a reason for being there. Because, on the one hand, I could put my work up, but there was this kind of, I guess there was a little, like, carrot in the air that I could sort of do a Fred Wilson at the Met and use things from the collection, and that also seemed unfair, because I'm not Fred Wilson. Fred Wilson is Fred Wilson, and he does those projects. But I do like those projects. So after Hurricane Katrina hit, and there was this moment, right, where we were all, like, I think there was this kind of collective, like, inward breath. If we weren't actually on the ground in, like, New Orleans, like, suffering or, having, to deal, then we were watching from, various perches, watching on CNN and looking in the paper, and I started to kind of wonder about that kind of evolution from this kind of shared collective, like, sense of horror or, whatever, like the sort of unnameable, and then the way that starts to kind of, like, disintegrate into separate individual stories, right? So there's all these separate stories that start to emerge, and sometimes those stories are myths that are propagated, and sometimes they're images that sort of resemble other images. There was an image of New Orleans that looked like a Turner painting, for instance. There was, there were these kind of references that seemed very tied to, like, the biblical flood. And I started to wonder about that process of, I wondered about how images were affecting the way we would tell a story or think about the feeling that we had collectively, that was quickly being lost. So I wound up thinking, oh, I have a show that I could do about this. I have a venue where this could actually take place at the Met. And I proposed, a show that was sort of revolving very fluidly around these ideas of, of water, and African Americans' relationship to water and to Americana and to places like New Orleans in the world and ports of call and liquidity and fluidity and Middle Passage and, destruction and death and swimming and not swimming. And, so all of those things were kind of, sort of present, I think, for me when I was, watching these images and, feeling these feelings. So that's what this show was about. I really only have the overview shots, but there were, historical images of floods in, the Netherlands, and then there were sort of allegorical paintings about Noah's flood, after the deluge, and there were some of works of mine that were, kind of recontextualized to sort of, they lent their wetness to the conversation. So,
and this is part of that.
These were sort of an earlier body of work with the text and these small gouache paintings. Every now and then, as I'm working, I step back and either write or type or work in, sort of small format, just as a way of kind of, figuring out where my head is. What's interesting.
So these images, these are from American Primitives. That was the show that we originally were in, and it was from 2001.
Right.
So that you said there was a combined cards, typed cards,
what
and
I did
squash
with,
paintings.
the note cards, so the typed cards were, initially I was, this one says it all, I think it was the first one.
Yeah.
Perhaps now is the time to do away with pictures of things which engage our pleasure centers before trying to destroy them.
Right.
And
so you did that
that
with
was,
words here.
and this is like the question I constantly ask myself. It's like, okay, so everyone gets it. So now, what images am I going to make? So I said, well, maybe I'm only going to write things for 3 months or something. So I just sat at home and sort of typed out things. And I thought, I don't think there'll be a story, and I don't think they're a poem. They might be a picture, or maybe they'll lend themselves to pictures. And so I did that for a while, and then I wound up finally feeling the need to have these pictures. And I had been looking at some, primitive, paintings by sort of untrained artists, and thinking that I was essentially an untrained painter because I had abandoned painting. So I set back to doing these small landscapes with, then they're tissue paper cutouts. Actually, it's fairly thin.
And this has a subtitle, Familiar.
Yeah, Familiar. Yeah, each one of them has a separate title, and I think maybe there's one more.
There's
that
little
one.
Combined.
That's the image that.
And that's a found image.
That image is from it's a novel about the Ku Klux Klan from a anti-Klan perspective that is called, oh, goodness gracious, I'm so sorry for you humanities people that my literary references are totally off, but it's something in the Invisible Empire. Okay. And it's just an image from there.
And that it was actually in the book, illustration in the book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it a woman holding a gun?
I think it's a woman firing at a Klansman in the night. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. We like that. And then there's this one's subtitled Entrance to the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, Entrance to the Underground Railroad. Yeah.
Not very welcoming, is it? It's not very welcoming, is it?
It's not very welcoming. There's a small ladder in there.
All right. So then.
Okay. Yeah.
And this was those images that we just saw, even though they were part of the Met project, which was in 2005, 2006. Those were from 2001, and this piece
so
here is 2002.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
Insurrection, right?
No, this is not Insurrection. This
sorry.
is.
I'll leave that to you. Is this Darkytown Rebellion?
Darkytown Rebellion.
Darkytown.
Thank you. Yes, and actually it was related to the American primitive drawings. There was or paintings. There was one which I, didn't bring an image of, but it was kind of a reinterpretation of an image that I found in the American primitive catalog. It was a painting by an unknown artist, untrained artist, called Darkytown, and it was kind of the strange, weirdly, poorly perspectived image of a streetscape. And there's telegraph pole and a fence, and there's a dog, and there's a man, a black sort of caricatured figure, and it's all extremely crudely done. And I was wondering, I think there's a little house in it too, and so I did a copy of the painting, but I took the figures out, and then I made this piece as a sort of answer to that, I guess. And there's these kind of grotesque, mannerist kind of caricatures or variations on the figures that I've used in the past, but they're much less sort of, easily categorizable as, servile, slave figures. I think they're hard to read, intentionally hard to read. And
then there's something else going on, obviously, in this. Begin with projection.
Right. So we have the projections, and the projections I introduced as a way to sort of understand film or video. I, felt a kind of internal and slightly external pressure to, move into film and video. Some of that has to do with the, the nature of silhouettes, coming from shadow puppetry, and there's, a whole universe of shadow puppetry that, also is extremely interesting and influential. So I use these overhead projectors as a way to kind of understand how light and shadow and space worked before I actually investigated film and video. And you relate using projection in a way and getting into film as actually another way to get closer to painting again. Yeah, in a way. Which is interesting. I'm concerned because we're getting 5 minutes till questions, so yeah, we gotta get going. Go. There's a lot of film that kind of follows that. You get into film, or several films that follow the projections, the still projections, and this. This is Testimony. Testimony from 2004. That was the first one, and here, talking about shadows, and I mean you mentioned before, but this idea that visitors
going into a projection are then
Right.
implicated. They're right there in the piece with
Right.
with the other silhouettes. And here
I'm
so were
implicated
you.
in pretty much
Yeah.
all of the work, but especially in the film and video work.
Yeah. You are the puppet master.
Right. I am.
And multi-channel piece. And we're going to see
I think we'll see a clip of the other.
one.
Yeah,
in
this
a
is.
minute.
I'll just briefly say that this image of us working, me and several assistants, 6 miles from Springfield on the Franklin Road. I did 2 with the anticipation that I would make several more films or videos using a very loose skeleton of a text something that I found online, but, the Freedmen's Bureau kept, sort of extensive records of atrocities committed against, newly emancipated African Americans. And I was really interested in the kinds of lists of atrocities and acts of violence that were committed, just because this is kind of like how history happens, and how history happens is often looks quite mundane in some of these transcriptions. And so this video was kind of a long, mundane, entry into a terrible act. So I just wanted to preface that. I haven't really finished that series, but I wanted to see how that looked, or what would happen if I used the language that I've been using to, interpret a story that is, entirely based on fact, but, can't, in the retelling becomes more complicated, or is complicated by the act of telling, let's say, by the act of narrating.
This is the piece. I think we were going to show a clip, but I'm wondering if we maybe want to keep going so we can actually talk about the new work a little bit.
Huh? Oh, right, we have to get to the new work.
So maybe
we can afterwards. Maybe
if we have some time after,
Yeah.
So these
so these are stills from
it.
Fall from Grace, Miss Pippi's Blue Tail, which is a long 18-minute epic video, which tries everyone's patience.
All right, we're going to skip over it, though.
Okay.
We'll come back.
Skip ahead?
All right. Do you want to skip these?
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
So this was, here we're going to talk a little bit more about how writing enters into the practice, but in this
right, and the recent show that I had at the gallery, which included block printed text and these large drawings, which are present, or drawings like them are present in the show here.
Yeah, and this show, notably, there are no silhouettes.
No silhouettes.
At all.
Right. That was kind of important, I guess, for me to just see what happened if I dedicated myself to, thinking of my images through just drawing through.
Mm-hmm. And drawing on a large scale.
Yeah.
Here we see some more silhouettes, but this is a kind of interesting precursor to the piece that we have.
Right. And I started throwing all of my drawings in the same space as the silhouettes in this 2010 piece about Huckleberry Finn, and I was really, just thinking it was kind of an overdetermined project in a way, like it was really just about Huckleberry Finn, only all the work in the show,
a group show about Huckleberry Finn.
All about Huckleberry Finn, and I was like, okay, everything's about everything, so it's also about me doing silhouettes and me doing all my things, so I just put everything in one space.
So here, frame drawings,
we got painted, landscape and cutouts.
They're kind of all mixed together for the first
happening
time.
At the same time.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us here.
Brings us to the show.
Here we are.
Stairs.
Yeah, rise up, you mighty race.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about where this is coming from.
Well, the intro, we had an intro earlier, you heard some of where it was coming from, and I don't know where it's going. I think that's the crucial aspect that, with all this work. But, I was thinking of, I guess the title's, very specific on the one hand, from Marcus Garvey, and then Marcus Garvey by way of Barack Obama, who happened to pop onto my headphones while I was, listening to I had my iPod on shuffle, and I heard him say, "Rise up, ye mighty race." Initially, I was thinking that this show would have a title, something along the lines of, the never-ending, ever-present race war, something that would sort of like bring this warring, this idea of races, constantly at battle into the forefront. But I used that title because it seemed somewhat ambiguous, and because I had been looking at these white supremacist, novels. It was not just the Turner Diaries, but also the Klansman. Yes, the Klansman by Thomas Dixon Jr. That because I'm always interested in these texts that don't invite me in, or that there's no anticipation that a reader like me with my background or my interests would be investing themselves in it. And it's actually quite challenging to invest oneself in these texts, but somehow felt compelled to. So can we go to the next slide, and then I can.
These two slides are.
These are interesting contrasts because this will kind of present the struggle, my struggle anyway. This is my studio, and initial sketches, it was kind of like war, battle scene. There was sort of like gestures that felt somewhat familiar, sort of battle, maybe a Civil War battlefield. But as I was working, I started to think it's not a Civil War battlefield, it's a Civil War reenactment battlefield. How you tell the difference is kind of up to you, I suppose. But I guess some of the thoughts, we'll just say it's an incomplete work at this moment. Some of the thoughts, though, include, these ideas of gun ownership that are very current right now. I was thinking about this before the current, wave of this conversation, but as I was reading, the Turner Diaries, there's a lot of talk about, hiding your guns. There's this sort of paranoid fantasy around, loss of white male power as, equated to loss of guns and, Second Amendment rights. And that's kind of like the touch, the thing that touches off this kind of wave of, it's a diaristic kind of, it's written in a diaristic fashion, the novel. So,
I know I've been rushing you, but I'm going to take us a step back because I'm going to guess that most of the people in this room have not read the Turner Diaries. I'm going to guess.
I actually kind of hate bringing it up because it seems like very bad luck.
And it's, so it might be helpful just to have a real glimpse, quick glimpse of sort of what it is.
What it is?
Yeah.
Paranoid, sci-fi, or speculative fiction.
Fairly poorly written.
Yeah, it's fairly poorly written, but it's let's say it's a goddamned honest effort at like delineating, like the differences, like the world as it would be were it overrun, say, or taken over, if the power structure were entirely black and Jewish, right? And that is like the overriding like source for the paranoia and fear, right? And so so there's some, the part of that, talking about this that makes me fearful is that this book was really influential, inspirational to a lot of white supremacist neo-Nazis who have committed acts of murder against actual murder, including the Oklahoma City bombing. This like kind of anti-government, it's anti-government, it's anti-black, it's anti-Jewish, it's anti, these very, particular groups. So it's why I wanted to look at the text was what is this book that has so much power? What is this mythology that, permeates into the culture, sort of sometimes somewhat unnoticed, or sometimes unremarked upon, when, people talk about, guns, when people look at Barack Obama, when the Tea Party starts, handing out flyers with a Hitler image of Barack Obama, like all of that stuff, has its genesis someplace. It doesn't just come out of nowhere, but this kind of, I guess what is interesting to me is like the idea of a novel or an artwork, let's say, let's just like give it the benefit of a doubt and say it's an artwork, tries to coalesce all of that anxiety, all of those fears into one spot with instructions, right? And I'm also, I guess, also interested because in that type of writing, there's no room for ambiguity. There's no room for nuance. There's no room for, for art, really. So it's like sort of working against itself by trying to be literary, by trying to make itself understood. It works against its own efforts. It becomes sort of weirdly artless. And I guess my work is so much about ambiguity that, to try and like enter into a space that's all about like certainty and, clarity is, equally, troubling and challenging. And so, what this is, some of this effort is represented here. Some of this effort, I think, is still yet to come. But this, is like the opening salvo, I guess, of my, attempts at sort of negotiating a terrain that's not just about white supremacy, but it's also about the sort of. I think one of the questions I asked myself was, what do you get when you get what you want? And there's, within that text that I'm talking about, and also within some ideas around, a black separatist state, like the, RNA, like I was thinking the NRA and the RNA are superimposed on top of one another in my universe here, in my installation. And this is Republic of New Africa. This is like a black separatist idea, that's been around since the 60s at least. What do you get when you get what you want? In what ways, if we believe in a kind of race-based society, in what ways are we completely codependent? Completely, not just interdependent, but codependent, in need of the other in order to justify our ideology, in need of having an other. In the Turner Diaries, the author winds up needing black bodies to clean up the mess, They wind up needing, like there's a constant presence of the other. You can't just let it go, like just let it go and go do your thing, but it's not like that.
No.
And so I decided to sort of approach this kind of world of thoughts with like extreme compassion.
And you are a better woman than I, because I could not do so. I read the text and I was unable to get there. I could not enter that. I could not enter his world.
Yeah.
But you did, you turned into art what was kind of what became inherently artless yourself.
It is artless.
That you put you put the ambiguity back in, as your work always does, this kind of ambivalence as a kind of, hallmark, a kind of way of putting us all back in a place where, there are no answers, there are questions, there are no,
yeah.
Here, I heard, the question asked of you, where are the enemies? And it's exactly, we don't know here.
And I think in my universe, and maybe that's why it feels sort of incomplete, we're sort of in this kind of soupy place right now between, like I said, the opening salvo, the sort of first page, and somewhere, in the last page, but there's still right now the drawings are sort of functioning as, places to kind of hold on to this warped ideology that, just keeps sort of pushing itself forward without any kind of nuance. I mean, the drawings might be more nuanced, but the texts that are within the drawings are not.
Yeah. Well, that soupy place, we want to try to allow people in the audience to kind of enter into that too. So I think we'll open up to questions now from the audience, and see if we can get some more clarity or more ambiguity.
More ambiguity.
You spoke a little bit about Barack Obama and Marcus Garvey. Have you looked at Harold Washington at all? First black mayor of Chicago?
Not really. I do remember the controversial artwork from several years ago
Yes.
that got a lot of flack. I wasn't here, but I remember hearing about that.
What types of books did you read as a child? You mentioned being in elementary school and Uncle Tom reference. I'm curious in terms of your childhood reading. What books did you read?
As a little kid?
Your little kid, yeah.
As a little kid, my favorite books as a little kid, there was one called Jennifer, Kate, Macbeth, William McKinley, and Me, Elizabeth, which also has a long title, and I love, which was about two little girls, one black, one white, and the black girl was a witch, which was what I was when I was a little girl. Yeah, that was actually my favorite book. I read a lot of comics, too, cartoon comics, Peanuts, Doonesbury, those kind of comics.
You've spoken a bit about identity and how the quest for coming to terms with some identity and balancing all of those issues in your work. And I wonder, where is the role of audience in your work?
Oh, the audience?
Yes.
I think generally, well, there's no general audience, but I think that I've always been interested in the relationship that, the author and the object and the viewer have to one another, and that, with the titles and the way that I've tried to kind of like envelop us, implicate, I guess the idea is that I'd like us all to be sort of implicated in this, in the work itself, in what we think we see, and maybe, maybe it's not entirely kind, but I think because I'm always asking myself what it is I think I am, I want the audience to do the same, to sort of be a little less certain, maybe, or a little more open to the question of what it is what is the stuff that makes us? What are the stories, or what are the stories that we tell ourselves to sort of understand our being in the world?
A couple up here, but I don't know where the mics
I have
are.
a question with regard to how do you, it's about sexuality and interracial sexuality as it expressed in your work. What is your intent in representing that? Because that seems to be a theme in your work. Is it one of sort of critique, or sort of not critique, but rather sort of representing unexpressed desires? Or would love to hear what you think.
Yeah, no, I think because, I was talking before about, this sense that I had as a young artist that I was trying to sidle up with white power in a way. And, it wasn't just, we're also talking about relationships and personal relationships, and also kind of the social universe that I was operating in as far as like entering into, ideas of modern painting and things like that. There's a critique, but there's also, it's not a critique of anyone, it's also about, again, the question, like, what does that even mean, interracial, like as far as desire goes? Like there's love and there's desire, and then there's like this whole other kind of universe that sort of, sexualizes it and turns it into some sort of turgid, animalistic, like other, set of problems, and problematizes it. And, I was interested in looking at all of that, again, like holding to sort of, completely contradictory ideas simultaneously. This is how, I guess, I operate and how my work operates. It's like, on the one hand, to understand myself as, the person that I think I am, sort of quirky being with my own set of desires, and also to understand how I am viewed from the outside by, as a desired being, or, or an ugly being, or whatever is being seen. But, I think that what has been maybe problematic in my work is, and it was the sort of jokey way that I, announced myself as the Negress, who is, there's this I'm sorry, I'm just going on. There's this character in The Klansman who I guess is based on a real figure because she also occurs at the end of Lincoln, if you saw Lincoln. Because I was reading The Klansman again, and I was trying to get through it, and then I went and saw Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, and I was like, oh, that's, that guy whose name's changed in The Klansman to Stoneman, and then he's got this, like, wily, mulatto housekeeper / lover who's constantly referred to in these, like, animalistic, awful, cat-like terms as this kind of, like, conniving, scheming something or other. And I was actually horrified in a way that Spielberg seems to have referenced her in almost the same way. And she was super sweet, but it was like she didn't have a role in the movie, right, in Lincoln until the very end. It's like the surprise ending. And but that character is kind of like the way, I guess, I'm not answering your question at all. The way I like to think about, talking about, complicating interracial, conversations. Like, is it that or is it me?
We're gonna take one more quick question.
I'll give you a long answer.
Before we finish here, I'd like to remind you again that you're all invited to view Kara's new work on the second floor galleries in the Modern Wing on your way out.
Hello? Hi, Kara. Sorry.
I can't see you where you are, so I'm sorry.
hi. I was just curious, earlier you spoke a bit about starting silhouette work because you felt closed off from certain painting conversations, and now you are moving away from silhouette work to sort of open up a new conversation. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little more about this journey you've been on.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of ongoing. Initially, as a young painter, I was being met with this kind of, there's a couple of almost standard critiques that used to happen, and I think still sometimes do, where, the young abstract painter will be told that they're not making work that's fully representative of themselves, and this can be told to you by numbers of types of people, and, not to disparage anyone, I had some lovely teachers coming along, but, it's like, oh, this is the first time we've seen you paint a black woman, would, be a kind of comment that would come up, and then I'll say, oh, right, okay, does that mean something to you? And then, and other times I would do something that was much more kind of, enigmatic and, kind of new imagey, and, black friends and students at school would say, well, you're not doing anything that represents us. I'd say, okay. But it's me, so doesn't that count? But, so I started doing, the silhouettes and really just sort of like trying to take on, head on this, this sort of schism between like what it, like the being, the person that I am and the way that I was, being manipulated, I guess, and so in that effort, it's it's part self-investigation, part cultural investigation, and now there's so much stuff around Kara Walker the artist, which is like added to the stuff of being a black girl in the world, in America, blah blah blah. So that's like another piece on top of my history that winds up having to be a part of the exploration, whether that's like the person who works with the silhouettes, the person who does drawings, or the person who, is a, cultural force in the world, or something, like there's a lot of imports, and there's a lot of, dismay. And, I guess there was a small body of work that we sort of ran through very quickly, where I just very quickly decided to, make, it's the...
You gotta turn it off.
Huh?
They turn
Oh, it's off, yeah. They're, sort of verbal or textual portraits of Black women, creative people as viewed on Wikipedia, right? So I just sort of typed out with, these block letters that I cut myself, the sort of biographical entry. And that was a way of just kind of like processing like all the like fame stuff. So I didn't have to make a whole body of work that was about being famous, because that could be the most boring thing in the world. It was like that's, but I did want to sort of address the Kara Walker with the quotes around, and then try and get back to the stuff of what I'm doing in the studio and my other ideas. So that, but in a way, the large drawings grew out of, having to sort of address like the larger question of my being in the world, or my being in the world as it's expanded a little bit, and then bring it back to. I don't know if that answered your question, but I made an effort.
I think it did.
I think we're done.